I'm finally glad Star Trek had the gall to say it. Fuck pears. Yes, hello interwebs! It is finally time for my favorite time of, I guess it's gonna be all year long now. I was gonna say my favorite time of year, but really we have so much Star Trek on the horizon. But regardless, it is finally time to start talking about Star Trek again. And not only that, my favorite Star Trek airing on TV right now, on streaming, whatever, you get the idea. It's Star Trek Lower Decks time. I'm really excited to talk about it. It's my favorite modern Trek show right now, and I am just so glad it is finally back for season 2. And we're gonna be talking about the season 2 premiere episode, Strange Energies, and I am so pumped to talk about this. For those of you who are new to the channel, how I structure these reviews is, first up, I'm going to giving my spoiler-free thoughts on this episode, and then after about a minute or two of that, we'll go full into spoilers, where I'll break down the episode bit by bit, sequence by sequence, and we'll talk about everything that I want to nerd out about with this episode. But first off, spoiler-free, what did I think of the season 2 premiere of Lower Decks? Well, first and foremost, this episode is very much more Lower Decks in all the best possible ways. Without spoiling too much, this episode does take a sort of typical Star Trekian trope, the sort of godlike aliens. Again, I won't say how and where it goes with that, but this sort of godlike alien Star Trek trope, and really sort of does all the fun stuff with it, really plays with it. Everything you kind of expected from season 1 of Lower Decks, where it sort of just takes something Star Trek and extrapolates it out and sort of plays with that trope, especially sort of Next Generation type tropes. Though there are a few references to non-Next Generation stuff here, which I'm excited to see. And I hope they lean into more of, because season 1 of Lower Decks definitely had a lot of next-gen references with a few others here and there, but was really leaning into that, so I'm hoping this season will lean more into other references to like TOS, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and really play with those tropes as well. And we're starting to see that within this episode here. So that was really fun. I really liked seeing that sort of like new, fresh spin on what Lower Decks season 1 was doing as well. But the other thing too that I'm really enjoying about this episode is kind of building off of the fact that all the storylines that season 1 had kind of pushed the story forward, moved these characters forward in a new way, and we're still seeing that in season 2. One of the big worries that I had going into the season, that it was just going to instantly sort of reset the status quo after the big shakeups that we saw last season with the characters, especially Mariner and Boimler and Rutherford and Tendi. There was a lot of stuff that happened there, and this season doesn't really undo any of that. In fact, it keeps it going forward, and I thought by the end of this episode we were going to have everything back to the status quo, but there are some dangling plot threads that are still going on. I still have a little bit of concern. We'll talk a little bit more about this in my spoiler-filled section. I do have a little bit of concern that the show is sort of heading towards just resetting the status quo back to where it was sort of the middle of season 1 of Lower Decks, and that's the direction it's headed. But overall, just taking this episode as it is, I am liking that the character arcs and character movement is still in a forward momentum and not just sort of resetting us back to where we were, which is kind of a problem with especially later Star Trek Voyager especially, but even Next Generation kind of had that problem as well. So I'm hoping that Lower Decks doesn't sort of lean into that here as well, and we're seeing that to a degree. All of that being said, none of this would matter if it wasn't funny, and heavens, this was a really, really funny episode. I loved a ton of the jokes. There's a lot of visual gags as per usual, a lot of Easter eggs that I'm sure you can find, but there's enough here that, like, again, if you're not a big Star Trek fan, of course you're gonna laugh, you're still gonna have a lot of fun. I died laughing at quite a few parts of this. I will say it wasn't my favorite episode in terms of the comedy of Lower Decks. There's a few more in season 1 that I liked more, but there were a few moments, particularly a moment with Dr. Ta'ana towards the end of the episode, that I just was bowling over laughing, to also use kind of a pseudo pun there, but it was a really good moment. And also the other thing too that I liked about this episode is that we're only focusing on a certain select amount of characters staying on the Cerritos. At the end of last season, we knew that Boimler had gone off on the Titan, and then we have our main characters still staying on the Cerritos with Mariner and Rutherford and Tendi and all the rest of the crew. And so I liked that this episode sort of honed in on them and seeing where they're at, and we didn't split off to see Boimler all that much this episode. It's sort of like making us have like a setup for next episode, episode 2 being the more Boimler-centric one. So I like that they kind of honed in and focused on what these characters were doing and feeling instead of splitting up the episode and kind of distracting us in 2 different places. I think that's a smart move by the show. And so overall, to end out my spoiler-free thoughts, I think this was a really, really funny episode, a really strong start to the season. There's a couple things here and there that I'm a little bit nervous about, but that's me projecting possibly forward. It may totally work out to be not a big deal at all in the next few episodes. But taking this episode as it is, a great start to the season. I'm very encouraged by it. It's definitely more Lower Decks, but we're starting to see a little bit of shakeup here and there. The actual way that this show is formatted in different ways, and I'm really excited and down for it. But all that being said, it is time to get all sexy and spoilery. Sexy and spoilery? Yeah, sexy and spoilery. Sure. That's what I'm going with. Because we're going to go into our spoiler-filled section here. So if you haven't seen the episode, stop here. Go watch it. What are you doing? Why even on my channel if you're not even watching lower? I am offended. I'm offended. I'm suddenly becoming foghorn leghorn here. Anyways, spoiler section. I gotta stop. Spoilers now. Alright, as per usual, now that we're in the spoiler section, I'm going to do what I usually do and go through sequence by sequence and break down this episode and just talk about all the stuff that I really, really loved. So starting off, the opening sequence of this episode was honestly fantastic on so many different levels. It was honestly a truly writing masterclass. Basically, what we're set up with is what we eventually learn is that Mariner is in a holodeck program doing her sort of daily workout routine, but she's doing it as a Cardassian prison break, which I think is absolutely hysterical. I love the idea that Mariner decides to do her workout in a prison break sequence with Cardassians. That makes total sense for her, but I also really loved how the episode sort of sets that up. First off, we're sort of made to believe that this is actually what's really going on. We have like dramatic music, which by the way, whoever the composer was for the sequence did a phenomenal job. The music was on point. It could have been right out of a Star Trek movie, was deserving of that. So we're automatically given this weight, but we started to notice a few things are off. Like Mariner's wearing workout outfit, which is hilarious. Mariner doesn't seem to be concerned, which could kind of fit with Mariner. Mariner could just be in a prison break sequence and not care about what's going on around her. That fits with her character, but it does kind of lead into the fact that this is a holodeck situation. And then as she's starting to escape, she runs into Boimler wearing his Titan outfit, and Mariner says, I'm not going to save you. I'm not going to rescue you. Which is, like, again, a little bit weird for Mariner, even though, it makes sense that she would be upset at Boimler for sort of leaving her behind. But then, of course, Boimler references the fact that he is a holodeck program. And so we start to realize, like, oh, this is all on the holodeck. But what I'm liking about this sequence, not only this sort of build-up to the reveal that it's a holodeck program, it's kind of doing two things simultaneously. The first is giving us a lot of exposition, because Mariner's sort of talking through all the stuff that's going on between the end of season 1 and this season premiere. She's working with her mom. She's sort of not entirely clear about how she feels about working with her mom as the captain and sort of working alongside her after they sort of rectified their relationship at the end of season 1. So it's giving us all that exposition. It reminds us that Boimler is off the ship as well. So it's doing all that exposition, and yet it's also subtly reinforcing the bit of character development that we got from Mariner at the end of season 1, because we saw in episode 9, Crisis Point of season 1, that Mariner had started to like doing therapy via big explosive holodeck programs. So not only is this a workout program for her, but it's like subtly reinforcing this idea that Mariner is kind of getting therapy through all this. I mean, why else would she program Boimler into this program if it wasn't to have some sort of therapy? If it was just a calisthenics program, she would just make it a prison break. But she put Boimler in there because I think subtly she's trying to work out her issues, which I think was sort of a nice sort of subtle reinforcement of her character, as well as giving us all this exposition on top of that. Not only that, the sequence is just a lot of fun. I mean, clearly it's referencing Chain of Command, the sort of Next Generation episode where Picard get captured and tortured by the Cardassians. I think a lot of sets are reminiscent of that. Boimler also references that they keep showing lights to him, which is a reference to the "There are 4 lights" that Picard does in that episode, which is like basically one of the biggest memes in all of Star Trek, if you don't know. So all of that's really a lot of fun, but I really love how this sequence ends with her escaping on a Reliant class vessel, sort of like the Wrath of Khan ship that we saw there, and then Jennifer, the Andorian, who we got a few references in season 1 that apparently Mariner just absolutely hates for some reason, coming in and just being like, I would just do freaking yoga. Why are you doing a prison break for your workout routine? And that calling her off to the bridge. A great sequence, and I also love that Mariner makes this little joke. She says, I know we're not supposed to have any interpersonal conflict, but I hate that Andorian. Again, referencing the fact that she's always been hating on Jennifer as sort of a subtle joke in season 1, but also referencing the fact that Gene Roddenberry had this rule for Star Trek The Next Generation during his first few seasons, because he was sort of in charge of the show, that characters on The Next Generation could not have interpersonal conflict, which was a big issue for a lot of the writers, because drama and writing kind of comes from conflict between characters. And so without that, it was sort of really, really tough. So that reference that Mariner is making to that was sort of Gene Roddenberryan rule that Starfleet officers couldn't have interpersonal conflict. So nice little reference there. Overall, this opening sequence, really great. I just, it's doing so much with so little, and I absolutely adore it. Then we get the opening credit sequence, and I just mentioned that because there's a slight change to the opening credit sequence in that the sequence where the Cerritos sort of runs up to the ships and then nopes out of there during the title credits. There's actually some new ships in there. It used to be just the Borg and the Romulans fighting each other, but now we see Klingon ships in there, as well as the Pac-led ships from the end of season 1 of Lower Decks. I know this is really subtle, but I really kind of like this. I like that they added the Pac-led ships in there because it's starting to show that Lower Decks is becoming confident in its own identity as a show. The Pac-led ships are something that were unique to Lower Decks, and it's just nice to see that a show that is so clearly, referencing a bunch of other types of Star Trek is also within that finding its own identity and making sure to find ways to say, like, no, this is us. It's not just referencing all of Star Trek, but Lower Decks is its own show and it adds its own bit to the Star Trek canon as well. So I just thought that like subtle change to the opening credits was a nice show of confidence in this own show to not only reference other parts of Star Trek, but be its own thing as well. I thought that was just a really cool, subtle thing. After the opening credits, though, we get a nice little sequence sort of setting up Mariner's storyline throughout this episode. We see that she's working with her mom. They've been doing a lot of missions together, and they're kind of really trying to force it, but you kind of get this idea that they don't really love it. It's all really nice, and like Mariner's like going through the trinkets, that they've been doing things, and you see that they're trying to support each other, but it's uncomfortable. They don't really know how to work together. And Mariner even asks, like, hey, can I go down to the planet to do some power washing? Because they've like never cleaned up after their industrial age, which is such a weird Star Trekian sort of thing that this planet just is past its industrial age, but Starfleet wants to show like, hey, we can clean up and help out. Just a nice little thing there. And Mariner's mom, Captain Freeman, is very much like, yes, I support you, daughter. All really great stuff. But it's also setting up the other conflict of this episode because Ransom is there being completely ignored, the first officer of the ship, and is really annoyed because you can clearly see that these two are really trying to force it and he's being ignored at their expense, which is sort of setting up that arc of the episode. But then after that, Mariner goes down to sort of her lower decks bunks and starts talking with Tendi and Rutherford, and they're hanging out, and they sort of talk about like Boimler being gone, and they're sort of using his bed for sort of storage. They even have like a Vulcan chest set in there. I'm sure there's a bunch more Easter eggs that I missed, but that was just a lot of fun to see. But then we sort of also get the setup for the Rutherford and Tendi storyline here, where Rutherford is going out on a date with the same ensign that he went out with way back in the season 1 premiere. And this I really, really loved because the reason that he's doing that is that at the end of season 1, Rutherford got his memory erased, and he doesn't remember any of the events of season 1. And I really, again, this is something that I was talking about in my spoiler-free section. I like that this season isn't like sort of going back to the status quo, but really building off of the choices that they made at the end of season 1, that Rutherford's memory was erased, and there's going to be consequences for that. Now, it's not like crazy consequences because this is Lower Decks. It's not meant to be the high-stakes show like that, but I just like that there's the characters are moving forward, or backwards, as it were, for Rutherford, and that actually has consequences, and I really enjoyed that. But obviously, we start to see that Tendi is a little bit jealous of this fact. Now, she's attributing, like, she's worried about Rutherford because he's going out with this ensign that didn't work out before. He likes pears now, apparently, which is like a big change from Rutherford before. So, Tendi is clearly worried about him in some way, in her over-the-topian way. Everything has to be the 10th degree with Tendi. It's why I love her. But clearly, we get this, like, subtle hint that it's not really coming out of an actual, like, medical concern. She's jealous. She cares for Rutherford. She has feelings for Rutherford. We sort of saw that towards the end of season 1, and she's worried that she's going to lose him. It's a very nice setup for that. And honestly, kind of a nice subversion of their character dynamic that we saw back in season 1, where Rutherford was the one sort of, like, awkwardly pursuing Tendi, but not really know how to show it, and Tendi being the oblivious one. So now it's, like, the shoe's on the other foot. I'm going to go through the Tendi-Rutherford storyline, because I feel like I want to talk about that first, and then we'll talk about the other one. Because the Tendi-Rutherford storyline basically kind of goes where Tendi's sort of like trying to do medical treatments on him to really make sure that like his brain isn't being scrambled by his sort of cyborg implant and things like that. And so she starts testing him and torturing him and putting on shocks and stuff on him. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed this sequence, but I feel like it wasn't my favorite bit for me for a few different reasons. One, it felt kind of reminiscent of season 1, the episode where Tendi sort of was like chasing after this guy to get his friendship after she ruined his ascension ceremony. I think it was like episode 2 or 3 of season 1. It felt very reminiscent of that dynamic, sort of playing on that and that sort of type of comedy where just Tendi takes things to the nth degree, trying to care about people, but really sort of dealing with her own stuff. But that being said, it was still had some funny moments in there. And then the other bit too is I like the dynamic between Rutherford and Tendi, and I really hope that they lean into their romantic angle, and I like the shoe being on the other foot. But again, we're starting to see with this season that Rutherford and Tendi have sort of been cordoned off together, and they're the ones paired together. We don't really get to see like Tendi with Mariner or Rutherford with Mariner. Now, again, I'm really hoping that the season will explode that out. I've heard interviews from Mike McMahon, who's the showrunner of the show, who said that he does want to sort of change those things out and sort of like swap up the dynamics of the characters and put them in different dynamics with each other. But it's just not here in this episode, so considering that was a concern I had in season 1, it would be remiss of me not to mention it being still here in the premiere episode of season 2, but I have every confidence that the writers will probably shake that up as the season goes on. But, you know, I have to mention it because it's still here. But it's not necessarily a knock against the storyline. It's just a thing that I would like to see changed up, and I hope it doesn't lean into it later on the season. But moving on, though, we get a nice little date scene between Rutherford and the ensign from season 1. It's very much the same scene. They're in 10-4, the same shot angles and stuff like that, but obviously this date is going much better this time. I also loved the reference to the fact that, like, oh, you know, my sister always changed when she got the symbiote, to the sort of referencing the Trill symbiotes that we know the Trill can do, and makes this nice little joke of like, oh, it wasn't that she was constantly referencing all the different lives that she had, it was the fact that she always had to mention that she had a symbiote, which is very, very true. I mean, you look at like every single Dax episode in Deep Space Nine, and every single time she's like, well, I have a symbiote and I remember all these different lives. It just has to be like the thing that she constantly references, which I think is kind of funny. Very, very true. So that bit is funny, but then Tendi comes in and starts chasing after Rutherford, and they start getting running through the ship after each other. One thing I'll note here is I love this whole sequence, but I also love the fact that during this sequence, the other part of the episode where the big head ransom is attacking the ship, and Tendi and Rutherford are just completely oblivious to it. It's just like something happened in the background and they're dealing with their own crap. I thought that was hilarious, even though I haven't gotten to that part in the episode yet on that side of things, but I just thought that was funny. But they chase each other down, and eventually Rutherford sort of stops Tendi, gets her to sit for a moment and sort of puts a force field in front of him, and Tendi kind of sits down and kind of says what we kind of figured was the truth, that it really wasn't the fact that she was worried about him being sick. It was worried about like the fact that maybe if he changes his opinion on things, maybe he'll change his opinion on wanting to be friends with her. And I thought that was very sweet, very wonderful. And I love that Rutherford sort of like says like, oh, I would have done the same thing, using science to deal with emotional issues, totally what I would do, which is again a very Star Trekian thing. So very sweet sequence, but I like the little like additional moment at the end there where they're hugging and making up, and Tendi says, but don't date, I forget her name, but the Trill ensign, and Rutherford's eyes wide open. So again, sort of showing this like shoe on the other foot, that now Tendi's sort of the one romantically pursuing Rutherford, but neither of them are fully capable of admitting it. So I like this sort of subversion of the dynamic between these two, and I honestly, I'm so here for Rutherford and Tendi as a romance. I don't really want Mariner and Boimler together, but Rutherford and Tendi I'm so here for, and I'm really loving their sort of swapping of the roles here and not undoing Rutherford's memory wipe in order to do that. But this, of course, brings us to the second part of the episode, the Mariner storyline. Mariner and Ransom go down to the planet, the Abragosian planet. I love this bit where the Abragosians are trying to pick a communication number because apparently numbers are really important in their society. I always love that sort of like give an alien a weird alien trait, like, oh, they really care about numbers. It's like an important status symbol, so he's just taking forever with it. And Mariner starts to power wash the area, and we get like this whale mural. I wonder if that like mural that she uncovers by the Ancient Ones is sort of a reference to like the probe aliens from Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. Might be, might not be. Maybe these are the people that made that probe. Ooh, would be interesting. Answering that canon question that all of us are no one's scrambling for. Let's admit it. No one cares where the whale probe came from. It was just a nice time to do some time travel stuff. Anywho, Mariner accidentally activates a weird device which hits Ransom with some strange energies. The sort of like weird mystical stuff is like some techno-babbly thing. I love the Dr. Tana when she says like he gets hit by strange energies. Like it's just some unknown energy that can give you godlike powers or whatever stuff. Some whatever techno-babble needs to happen. And I love the show sort of calling that out. And Ransom getting godlike powers is truly a Star Trekian regular trope. I mean, the episode itself itself references Gary Mitchell from the very first, not the very first aired episode, but the second pilot that they filmed. Episode orders for the original series, weird. But the second pilot of the show where Gary Mitchell sort of became a godlike alien, fought Kirk, and Kirk threw a boulder on him, which is referenced in this a couple times in a hilarious way. But also, like I said, this is a tried and true Star Trek trope. There's numerous episodes like Riker in Next Generation got godlike powers at some point. I'm sure like Deep Space Nine, Jake Sisko got godlike powers at one point, got like prophets put in him or whatever. If Sisko himself is like born of prophets, all that random stuff. Star Trek just likes to give people godlike powers for whatever reason. This whole sequence is a lot of fun. I mean, there's this whole bit with Ransom making his own utopia. So he like makes other Ransoms, and then he starts transforming everything into powerlifting equipment and gym equipment, because that's what Ransom likes to do. He likes to work out. So of course his utopia is lifting equipment. I think that's hysterical. I like that it sort of builds off the character. Also, there's this recurring joke that Stevens, Ransom's friend from season 1, is like really into Ransom, is like really like deeply just wants his approval, which I think is really, really funny. And I like that they're sort of leaning into that comedic trope for that character, because he was just sort of a background thing in season 1, and now they're sort of leaning into this sort of like love of Ransom throughout here. But this sort of sets up this conflict between Mariner and Captain Freeman, where Mariner has one way to solve the issue, Captain Freeman has another way to solve the issue, and they don't really click, but they're trying to make things work. And Ransom sort of calling out several times in the episodes, like, you two hate each other. Why are you working like this? And I'm feeling ignored, and sort of like playing out that dynamic and sort of playing with that. And it's all really, really lovely stuff. I love the bit where Ransom like grows his head and pops it off and goes into space to attack the Cerritos. Felt very much probably referencing Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, the best Star Trek movie, of course. But then he also like grows hands at one point to attack the Cerritos and like nomming on it like a sandwich. The hands very much felt like Star Fox, the villain from Star Fox games. That's what I sort of felt like. All of that stuff was great. I don't have much more to say about it other than I was laughing fairly much throughout the entire thing. I will say that I loved that Captain Freeman, her attempt to sort of deal with Ransom is sort of stoke his ego, and Mariner saying like, he's a godlike being, you can't stoke his ego for long. And of course, Ransom starts to be like, I want to be the captain now. All really great stuff. I also like the moment where Mariner and Freeman sort of say to each other, like, yeah, no, I feel the exact same way. We don't work together very well, and I don't really enjoy it, and sort of being instigated by Ransom. That was good character growth, good character moments throughout all of that. All really good stuff. And I love that they solve the problem by Mariner kicking Ransom in the balls over and over again. I laughed at that. But the moment that killed me, that absolutely killed me, was when Dr. Ta'ana wheeled in a boulder and landed on Ransom, clearly referencing the fact that Gary Mitchell was killed by Kirk throwing a plastic boulder at him or whatever. Lovely. That got the biggest laugh from me throughout the whole episode, was just the landing of the boulder. Loved it. So all of that stuff was really, really great. I don't have a ton to say about it other than it was just a really funny sequence and good character growth moments. And then we get the final sequence of the episode where we sort of have Mariner and Captain Freeman talk to each other and also say that, like, yeah, we don't really work together. And of course, Mariner gets thrown in the brig again because she disobeyed orders, so she has to get thrown in the brig. Also, one other thing during the sequence that I should say, which is probably setting up stakes for the rest of the season, which I'm really hope gets brought back, because I trust Lower Decks to sort of be setting up these elements to bring back later, unlike Star Trek Voyager or something, which would just forget things overall. But we do learn that Freeman might be up for a promotion to get off the Cerritos and be put on like a flagship like the Titan or the Enterprise. So that's actually kind of interesting, and I'm sure that's going to be a character arc going forward, that Captain Freeman may be getting promoted or trying to get promoted throughout this entire season. So interesting stakes for her character going throughout here too. I liked all of that. And the episode ends with Mariner and Tendi and Rutherford down in the brig, sort of hanging out, doing their thing, sort of reminiscing about the episode. I also like the fact that Rutherford's like gotten fixed and now he hates pears again. Absolutely wonderful. This leads me though to not a critique with the episode per se, but this is something that I brought up in my spoiler-free section, just a kind of an asterisk worry about the episode overall and where this season might be headed. Because now that Mariner is no longer working with her mom, the captain, I'm worried that things might get settled back into the normal status quo for the series. And the episode also ends with a little sneak peek of Boimler over on the Titan and him freaking out and not really enjoying it, which is also kind of hysterical because they're in the middle of battle and Boimler's like, what's going on? Well, all great stuff. I love like this has too many licks, and Boimler says, what does that even mean? All great, fits those characters. But this sets up my sort of maybe major concern that everything's going to go back to normal. I mean, even in this, I think Tendi even says, like, oh, everything's back to normal now, except for we don't have Boimler, and clearly we're probably being set up for Boimler to come back in the next few episodes back to the Cerritos. So I worry that it's just going to set everything back to normal, and we're not going to get movement forward on these characters. There are other ways that they can move forward the characters. I just don't want everything to be set back exactly the way it was. But again, I trust the writers to be able to navigate that and sort of get us back to some form of normal status quo while not losing all the forward momentum they've had with these characters. So we'll see. It's just something that I'm sort of going to keep an eye on as the season goes forward. But all that being said, those concerns aside, this episode in and of itself, taken on its own terms, absolutely fantastic, hilarious. Not the funniest episode for me, but did have a few really good laugh out loud moments. Really showed a character progression and weight off of season 1, but also was still sort of felt familiarly lower decks, if that's a word. So overall, great episode. I'm really enjoying it, but that's enough of me ranting about the episode. I'd love to hear all your thoughts on Star Trek Lower Decks Season 2, Episode 1, Strange Energies? I cannot speak at this point. Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And if you want more of me ranting about Lower Decks, I also have a podcast called Drawn to Trek that I do with Geek Filter, one of the wonderful community members on this channel, where we rant more about Lower Decks and review every single episode. So if you want to hear me more talk about that, go subscribe to that podcast. The link should be down below or available wherever you find podcasts. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.